It is undeniable that our childhood experiences adversely shape our lives. But what happens in your childhood when there's traumatic events? Today's show, we talk about parent wounds. What are parent wounds and how do we heal? We'll talk about it right after this. What is mindset? Our mindset is based on what we believe, and anything we believe in, we put into motion. I have spent my life putting the mindset of perseverance into motion, and now I am here today to share my journey along with others whose mindsets have changed the course of their lives. Hi, I'm mindset coach Lorraine Lindsey, and I believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. So are you ready? Welcome back to another episode of The Mindsetters, where we believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. I am your host, Coach Lorraine Lindsey. I am a certified peak performance and mindset coach. Before we get started, I introduce my guest and our topic for today. Do not forget to hit the subscription button. Give us the thumbs up. Send us your comments. We love hearing from you all. And again, thank you for the continued support. So I want to get right into this show today. I have a very special guest who has come here all the way from Sedona, Arizona, to talk about parent wounds. We've talked a lot about forgiving our mothers and forgiving our fathers, but we want to dig a little bit deeper and talk to someone who is an expert in parent wounds and what they are and how to get to healing. So my guest here today is Genell Gorman, and a little bit about Janelle. Janelle is a trauma-informed international father and mother wound coach based in Sedona, Arizona. She's a daughter who experienced immense pain and suffering from a father wound. Later in her healing journey, she then realized she had a mother wound as well. She has been on her parent wound journey for quite some time, 17 years to be exact. Janelle teaches people all over the world in one-on-one group coaching, workshops, and retreat settings on how to heal their father and or mother wounds and set themselves free from personal experience, helping them reclaim their power that has always been inside of them. She was able to break through the challenging traumatic cycle that most women with parent wounds suffer from their whole life. Janelle uses the approach of healing to combine emotional release breakthrough, inner child work, somatic movement, spirituality, and many other tools and modalities to help her clients come home to themselves and truly live the life they deserve in their full, authentic self-expression. Welcome, Janelle. I'm so very appreciative of you coming on the show. When we talked and you reached out and we got on the phone, I was like, this young lady is totally in alignment with the message and the thing that I really want to convey to people. Because there's many different ways that I teach and talk about mindset. It truly does stem from the root, which is what we have on our inner child and what we experience.
Absolutely.
And so break that down for us. Tell us first how you even got to this point of being this specific of a coach.
Yeah, of course. Well, first, I just want to thank you for having me on your show. It's just such
Pleasure's
a pleasure
mine.
and such an honor. So, one thing that I feel like makes things different about me is I teach from experience, of course, education and whatnot, but also it's having lived with these mother and father wounds and experienced the hardships that have come with them, the dark of the dark, and also having been able to get to the light of it all. You know, and I feel like society today, it's something that is looked over because we were told growing up that family is family. If it's
Right.
blood, it's blood. And unfortunately, I think if we're not getting the respect, the love that we need from certain individuals, despite if they're family or not, it comes back to being treated the way that we have always been deserving of being treated, with love and respect.
Absolutely. And that ties into boundaries too. And I love that you said that, because I think that that's important for a lot of people that will be watching this show, is to understand that understanding what these wounds are, where they come from, is not to kind of dig up and unearth and make you feel and relive, but it is to say, these are things that have happened in my life, but how do I capture back, like you said, that self and not let it run and control you? Because a lot of people that have had traumatic experiences growing up, they carry that into their lives by making really poor choices, whether it's relationships, whether it's their self-esteem. So talk to us a little bit about how that affected you and how it led you to wanting to teach this. I mean, like I'm the same way.
Yeah.
My whole coaching experience is not just from learning techniques and tools, but it's also me and my own personal perseverance and going through it
Absolutely.
myself. So tell us a little bit about that journey for you.
Yeah. So growing up, my parents were together and then they divorced when I was 3. And that divorce was very hard on me. My father moved an hour and a half away, and I only was seeing him about every other weekend. And as a child, custody-wise, that just feels right. But I didn't realize how much that truly impacted me until I hit my mid-20s. And having grown up with a parent that also was dealing with their own drug addiction was a big thing for me because as a children, I feel like we automatically are intuitive. And I feel like I got extra of that intuition. So I knew there was always something going on, but I didn't know what. My dad was always tired. My dad, when I was away with him, we'd always do really, really fun things. But then they would be like coming down from things where he would just need to take naps. And I didn't really understand that. And then as I got older, then when I was 9, I lost my father to an overdose. And I was not informed of it being an overdose until about 2 years later.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's no animosity, there's no like anger I have towards that, but it was shocking. I still remember I was in like therapy and my mom was in the room and my therapist and my mom both told me, this is how your father passed away.
But here you are 11 years old at this point,
Mhm.
right? And so we say 2 years later, but you're still cognitively, you're only 11 years old.
Yeah.
So did you really understand and comprehend what that meant exactly when they were explaining to you that this is how dad passed away? And how did you think he died in the first place?
I was told it was a heart attack.
Okay.
And to answer your question, no, I mean, it was just all came at me so quickly that I wasn't able to process it. And unfortunately, that's what created turbulence into my adult life.
Interesting.
It's not being able to address these wounds as soon as they happen or as soon as we feel them. And the majority of the time, it's because we're so young that if we were able to actually experience the pain we felt, we wouldn't be able to survive.
Right.
So our nervous system is just acting as a protection for us. But unfortunately, I always tell clients it's a blessing and a curse because if we haven't gone into that core root cause of it, it's going to show up time and time again. So for me, it showed up in a way of dating emotionally unavailable men, just like my father, having grown up with a parent who was struggling with addiction. That also means that my father was making addiction a priority over his own daughter. And it wasn't intentional, I'm sure. Matter of fact, I know that, but it still affected me in such a way. And that's the biggest thing when it comes to parent wounds. I'm not one to say, hate your parents are awful. No, not at all. But it's how do I start to get to the core so I can be set free? Because
Absolutely.
It's a lot easier to say, they did the best they could and continue on with your life and allow all this turbulence to be in your life than you asking yourself, why do I keep attracting these emotionally unavailable men? Why can't I trust women? All of that.
Absolutely.
So, so it comes back to freeing yourself.
It's interesting you say that because I have similar, backstory. I lost my father at 10 years old to suicide.
Okay.
And same thing, having an experience where, my parents were divorced as well and going over dad's house for the weekend. And he was like the fun dad, but having that a lot of energy, and then all of a sudden having no energy or sleeping all the time and not really understanding that there was some drug and then there was some addiction or depression issues that he was dealing with. I did not understand that. And then when you're told that he took his life at 10 years old, you don't really comprehend why somebody would. And the emotion that I went into with that was guilt and blame. I thought it was my fault somehow. And what's interesting about that also is that when you lose a parent in such a way, such as addiction or, a suicide or things like that, there was a great deal of shame that I didn't know that I was dealing with. And that became a turbulent thing for my adulthood. I'll give you an example. I remember it wasn't very long after he had passed away, and I had a friend of mine who I would go to spend the night at her house. I lived in a terrible neighborhood. So she was never allowed to stay the night at my house, but I could go to her house all day long. And her mother would always ask me a lot of questions, and I'll never forget. She asked me one day, well, why don't you have a dad? And where's your father? And I remember this feeling of shame overcoming me. And I didn't want to tell her he took his life.
Yeah, that's a heavy question to ask a
And
child.
so I just told her, well, he was in a car accident. And I remember in my mind at 10 years old thinking, I don't want to lie. Because, and feeling that guilt of lying, but not wanting to tell her the truth. So my dad had been in a car accident at some point in his life, but that wasn't what killed him. And so what's interesting is it caused me in my adult life to sometimes manipulate and change stories. So even that had an effect on me.
Powerful. Yeah, actually, now that you're saying that, at my dad's funeral, I remember laughing at my dad's funeral, like just not knowing what was really going on. Knowing what was going on, but not knowing, like not having the tools to feel those emotions.
Right.
And that's what so many of us lack when it comes to these parent wounds. It's not knowing how to feel these emotions. So what you were saying, absolutely. And I recall when it came to dating and I was younger, kind of just being like, oh yeah, my dad passed away. Anyways, and just bypassing.
Right. The avoidance. And the thing about it too, with us talking about this, I've learned in my life, number one is that I'm not going to be a victim to the circumstances of my childhood. Things happened. And I've learned to identify with understanding that this is what's happened in my life, but knowing how to tell the story. And so it helps me therapeutically, and it gives me a sense of being powerful instead of powerless. Because there was a time when the stories and the narratives of the things that happened were so subconscious that there was almost a victimization out of it, and it showed up in life. And one of the things that you said when we talked prior to being on the show was you had mentioned that, the elephant in the room was my dad died through addiction. He overdosed. But dealing with that as a parent wound, but then discovering that some of your parent wounds had to do with your mother. So before you tell that story, let's go ahead and put up some definitions of what parent wounds are. So what are parent wounds? We have, I think, the mother wound and then the father wound. So the first one's a mother wound. The mother wound is an attachment trauma that creates a sense of confusion and devastation in the child's psyche. It instills deeply rooted beliefs that make the child feel unloved, abandoned, unworthy of care, and even fearful of expressing themselves. A father wound, they're actually not very different, but a father wound is another term for father absenteeism. When a person's father is physically absent, emotionally distant, or an abusive, negative or overly critical character, it can have long-term consequences for the individual. Parents are the first people children learn to love. So when they're unsupportive in any way, it can send a negative message. So what do you want to kind of piggyback to that when we talk about parent wounds? Because you also mentioned it isn't necessarily that you had a parent who died or a missing parent. Sometimes you can have
toxic parent or any of that.
You can have two parents in the home. So talk a little bit about that. And then I want you to go into the whole mother wound thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So to piggyback off that, a parent wound, it's the lack of emotional nurture that we needed from either parent. And without that emotional presence in our life, we tend to look for it outside of ourselves because we haven't addressed that wound internally. And as we know, when we haven't addressed the internal, it shows up in our external time and time again. Like back when I was attracting emotionally unavailable men, back when I had the people-pleasing behavior, it was constantly because I wasn't going inward. And then to answer your question, I don't know, this parent wounds is...
Like when we talk about, like, for example, with your mom, you knew, like I said, you knew that there was obviously when we were first tapping it, when we're first going to our healing work, I call it like the elephant in the room. This is the obvious thing. For me, as an example, it was first dealing with, okay, my dad took his life, but my dad was actually my stepfather, right? He was in my life from 6 months old until I was 10 when he passed. Not knowing, I'm thinking that's the obvious issue. Not knowing that I also had a parent wound with my biological father,
absolutely,
who I never even thought was even an issue, and then and some parent issues that I had with my mother because of how she responded to his death and how it led her and caused her to spiral, and not really understanding that this is a woman who just lost the love of her life. I was losing my mom in that, and not understanding what those parent wounds are. So what was it for you?
Yeah, so
with
when
your
it
mom?
came to with my mom, after my father's passing, it was almost like it didn't happen. Even my father's side of the family, it was almost like it was non-existent.
Mm.
So that was one thing. It was kind of just like push it under the rug, keep it moving. And that's like the motto that they tell us,
Mhm.
keep looking forward, don't look in the background. And I say, if you don't look in the background, everything's going to keep showing up forward.
Mhm.
And also with my mother, growing up with a mother who's Latina, a lot of times I wasn't given the physical affection that I needed. And I
Gotcha.
realized it then affected one of my past relationships a couple years ago in a way that I was unfamiliar with physical touch. I froze. And I realized it came back to with my mother. It took me up until about maybe 6 months ago or a year ago that I was able to comfortably hug my mother.
Wow.
Every other time, it was so timid. It was fearful.
So, what are some signs then for people where they don't have the obvious? Because we kind of started to go down that pathway.
Yeah, the other ways that you
Yeah,
can
the other way.
have.
So, because I feel like for like I had shared with you off camera, as I had a friend of mine, for example, and he had some significant parent wounds. I mean, he came from an incredibly violent, very toxic, brutal home.
Mhm.
And when he got out of that environment, I mean, he left home early. He went on a totally different pathway, and when he finally met his wife and had children, he decided, I am going to be a completely different person. I will never be my father and I will never marry someone like my mother. And they had this really seemingly great relationship.
Mhm.
And he was so brokenhearted when when his daughter graduated from high school. And he created a privileged life for them. He worked really hard. And she felt traumatized by him because she didn't buy him a car. And she
Mm.
literally told him, because the parents ultimately got a divorce. They were married for 35 years. Now the kids are adults, and she goes to counseling and she says, I'm traumatized as a child. And he's like, well, what did I do? And she's like, well, you were at my graduation, but you didn't get me a car. And for me, I was like entitled, like what the heck is going on with these kids these days? But for her, whatever that symbolized, whatever, and I know it's a rambling story, but
Mhm.
there are people who have wounds for whatever reason. And of course I didn't live inside that household to know what emotionally, if that was just kind of a surface thing, a symptom thing. So explain to people what these wounds look like and why it doesn't necessarily mean it had to be something overly traumatic that took place in your life.
Yeah, so of course there's the obvious, the abuse, the suicide, the addiction, like we just previously touched upon. But it's also like if you had a parent that was always working, always out of the house, if you had a dad that was always on business trips or a mom that was working 3 jobs, a single mother, it still comes back to not having received that emotional attachment or emotional, it's like relationship that you needed during that crucial age, which we say is between say 0 and 9.
Mm-hmm.
And if we didn't receive that, that's a big impact on us. So it comes back into also about what you were just saying. It's really important to also realize as parents, I mean, I'm not a parent, but as parents, our children are going to see things in different lenses.
Right.
So even in that case, what you said with your friend and his daughter not having received a car and her feeling that certain way, we can do the best we can, but at the same time, one little thing can create the wound. And that's why it's up to us to begin healing from it. So it
Right.
can happen to anything. It doesn't have to be the toxic, extreme, chaotic type. It
Right.
can also be, I've had someone I know where their dad was very physical, like once. And that one time created the belief that dad is unsafe.
Right.
And subconsciously, even as she continued to get older, it still feels unsafe.
Well, and what's interesting too is that it's the gift that keeps on giving, so to speak, and I
Mhm.
don't mean it in a light way. It's when when we talked, I started doing some research on parent wounds, and one of the things that I found very interesting is that part of parent wounding sometimes is having gone through a specific thing yourself and saying, "I will never be like my parent," and then being sometimes extreme in that, and
Mhm.
either being emotionally unavailable or shutting down or not really knowing because you didn't have the tools. So you're not your parent in this way. Maybe you're not the addict or the violent, aggressive person, but you may end up being someone who doesn't know how to connect emotionally because you're still dealing with your childhood wounds.
Absolutely.
And so that shows up differently for different people. And then it just kind of has this domino effect.
Yeah, and also creates even like hyper independence. When we're hyper independent, it's not, yes, it's I like to be independent, but the hyperness in that is because I am afraid of anyone getting close to me to hurt me, just like mom or dad did.
So I want to put up this next slide, and it talks about the wounds and how they kind of reveal themselves. So, for example, here, there's a mother was critical. How does that reveal itself? A loud inner critic,
That's
right?
huge, yeah.
Mother was unapproving, and so now you have a fear of judgment. Your mother was a passive aggressive, and it could go both ways, mother or father. So therefore, you have a lack of confidence. Unavailable equates to an inability to understand or express emotions. Codependent, so you have weak boundaries. Controlling results in rebellious choices, and pessimistic can lead to self-sabotage. On the father wound side, you've got not approving, so then you become a people pleaser, which you touched on. Not affectionate father, seeking affection. When you have a non-predictable father, then you're attracted to chaos.
Yeah,
Not emotional, then it reveals itself as apathy and distance. Not presence, codependent, and not gentle, therefore is fear. So for people who are watching and they're saying, well, I don't know if I have a parent wound. If you've experienced being a people pleaser or having distance. So for me, for example, I had an abandonment issue. That was the root of what my issue was with my father, with both of my fathers, right? My abandonment issue showed up as fear of engulfment. So I was the complete opposite. I didn't have this neediness and this clinging and don't leave me and attachment. What I did is I created distance. And it was really adversely affecting my relationships because I didn't want anybody getting too close. Because in my mind, and I didn't have it at the forefront, it was always something in the back of my mind. But in my mind, if you get too close to me, you're going to leave me.
Yeah, so let's keep you at a safe distance.
So let's keep you where I can control the emotion I attach to by keeping you at a distance. And it really affected my life and my relationships with people.
Yeah, see, I was the opposite. I was like, I want you, I need you, super attached. And automatically I would just jump into things and fantasize on people that didn't even make sense right away. And that's one of the things, I know this could be a whole different topic, but love addiction. It's that falseness of that addiction to love that you didn't receive as a child. And that's something I've had to do, like my 12-step program with and all of that. And I didn't even think love was an addiction until I was exposed to it. And I was just like, oh my goodness. That would be
a really good topic because
it's serious.
It is serious, and I see it all the time.
It's fantasizing, jumping, like that's one of the things also with the father wound for women and daughters. It's wanting to be loved so bad because you're still literally like craving for that love that you needed from dad. So anyone who like opens a door for you or says you're beautiful or gets you flowers, you're like, that's it. They're the one. I'm game over. I'm done. I'm getting married. And it doesn't allow you to just realize that, no, you deserve that because you deserve that.
Right.
And those are things that you should have received regardless.
Absolutely. It's so funny you say that because I have a really good friend of mine and she's been going through that a lot where she's at a stage in her life where she was married for a period of time and she's single now and she's just kind of, been putting herself out there to meet people. But what happens is, she's a very outwardly strong, independent woman and she's got, all her, I don't need anyone, but I need somebody kind of thing, right? And kind of having this a little bit of denial about who she is and her childhood, her wounds. And so what she does is that often when someone just gives her just the attention she needs, she just becomes like this open book to that person, and then what ends up happening is that because she wants it so bad, that fantasizing thing that she just kind of creates a little bit of a fantasy, but then she gets hurt. And so I say all that to ask you, why is this important for us to really understand what these wounds are, and how, and for our help and our healing? Like, what was your journey, and why was it important for you? Let's start with that first.
I mean, these wounds are destructive if we don't get them under control. And I mean that in the lightest way. Like, they really are so destructive. Why? Because they not only affect the relationship with ourself, which is the most important relationship that we need to
Absolutely.
cultivate if we want to create good and healthy connections outside of ourselves, but they also impact the relationships, the type of partners we attract. They affect relationships that we have with colleagues, with friends, all of that. So that's the biggest thing I would say. It's if you don't begin to heal these wounds, they're going to continue to show up in all of the ways that you listed above.
Mm-hmm.
The people pleasing, the codependency, the need for validation, the hyper independence. And at the end of the day, yeah, all we want to do is, I feel like as humans, is to be loved and receive love. But
Absolutely.
in order to, I feel like, truly be able to embody love fully to the full capacity, it's going through the pain that so many are afraid to go into.
That is the
And
key.
I was so guilty of that. And that's why I do what I do now.
So how did you get there? How did you get to
What
this
was my
realization?
catalyst?
And then how did you start your work?
Yeah. So my catalyst was, I would say, before the breakup that I had with an ex about a few years ago. It was consistently, again, I know I keep saying this, but attracting emotionally unavailable people, molding myself to how people wanted me to be, and dating older men, having sugar daddies, all of that I thought that was just like what I needed to do then, but didn't realize it all came back to my quote unquote, like society says, daddy issues.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interestingly enough, because I feel like daddy issues really comes back to the father that didn't show up.
Right.
And that's why the daughter's being impacted by it. And I feel like in society, it has such a low energy word, and it's almost like insulting to women. But hey, we could only do the best we can with what we were given.
Right.
So with me, as I went through my fair share of wanting to be loved, wanting to be given attention and whatnot. So I did attract relationships that were not in my highest and greatest good, toxic relationships, abusive relationships, all of that. And it was one relationship that lasted about 2.5 years with an ex-partner of mine that really set the tone for me, being like, never again. I'm not doing this again. This pattern, I'm sick of it. I was in the brink of having suicide ideation. I ended up having to go to rehab after that breakup. And that was where, when I went to rehab, I realized what was truly going on.
That's so real and that's so candid. And I, sometimes you have to have your breakdown to get your breakthrough.
Yep.
And I definitely can attest to that because I feel like I went through that. There was, I grew up in a home, there was a lot of violence.
Mm-hmm.
Independent, that was a whole nother situation in my childhood of parent wounds, of being around violence. Having this declaration for my life that I was never going to be that girl. I would never be in a situation like that until I landed in a situation like that, where it would start off as emotional abuse and then at times physical.
Mm-hmm.
And still needing to cling and hold on and fix it and make it work. And then allowing myself to be manipulated. Not only was he manipulative, but I was manipulating myself.
Mm-hmm.
And getting caught up in the fantasies and the ideas of this is the potential here. And if we just keep working, but I was the only one working, and on and on and on. But really having to have that breakdown where I just, I was a person that was just a shell. I was on autopilot. I was depressed. I was wishing time away from my life and realizing that was the moment where I was like, enough. I'm sick of this shit, but most importantly, I'm sick of me. Because why is she making these choices, And I've said it many times on this show, but just really needing that breakdown. And unfortunately, a lot of us have to go through that
1,000%
to get that breakthrough.
Yeah.
So you go to rehab, you have all this, and then what? Like, what was next for you? What was the next step? Because a lot of people need to know that they're just stuck.
Yeah, so I want to just rewind a bit and say, like, what you just said is you're sick of your shit.
Right.
That is the thing. When I have clients come to me, it's like they're on their breaking point. And guess what? Unfortunately, that's what it gets to sometimes. Hopefully, that's not whoever's listening. That's not the case with whoever's listening, but that does happen. And I was, again, the suicidal ideation, I understand now why people even consider suicide. And it's not about, I truly believe it's not about you wanting to end your life, even though I was thinking that and I did want to do that. But it was more so the pain that was inside of me that I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to release it. If I knew how to release it, I probably would not have had those thoughts. But those thoughts were surfacing because I was in so much pain that I needed to escape it. So thankfully, when I went to rehab, they taught me all these new tools and modalities. And as soon as I got to rehab, I knew it was up to me. If I wanted to
What
change
got
my
you to
life.
rehab though? Because there are some people that never get there. How was it that you were able to find a haven for yourself in such a
Yeah.
dark space
So I
and be
was
open to it too?
okay. I was again surrender mode. I was in couples therapy with my ex at the time, and my therapist was telling me, "You should go here. You should go here." And I said, "No, no, no, no," because I was so deep in my trauma, and I knew that
Mm-hmm.
if I went to rehab, I would have been told I need to leave my partner.
Mm.
But I was not ready to hear that because I was so deep in wanting to be loved. And
That is
after
so deep.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was serious. And I will say one thing is when me and my ex broke up, and again, this is like an ex from years ago, not recent. Uh, what I realized that breakup was so detrimental
Mm.
to me. And as I got deeper into this work, I realized the reason why it was so deep, it wasn't because, yes, I loved this man, I did, but it was because it reminded me so much of my father
Yeah.
due to him being older, due to how he just left. It was that abandonment wound, and our brains can't tell the difference
Right.
whether a parent passes away at a young age or a parent passes away or if a parent leaves us, abandons us, our brain still sees it as abandonment.
Right. And emotionally, we're finding the familiarity in that, what's familiar. And that was something that was a pivotal thing for me. This is why I talk about mindset.
Mhm.
Because if we don't understand what we believe, then we don't understand why things are showing up in our lives. So I may understand that this was bad cognitively. I could say it with language and through my frontal cortex and my new brain.
Mhm.
But the old brain says, I have a narrative and a story that says, this is pain, pain is pain, this is what it feels like, and I believe it. So I seek it out in my life. I'm just seeking for the physiology and the physical feeling and emotion that's tied to a belief system that I have. And it's so deep rooted, it's a blind spot that most of us don't even see because it's an
Yeah.
unresolved, right? Like you were talking about your father or your mother. Same with me. There were unresolved that I didn't even realize because at 10 years old, at some point, I buried it.
Yeah.
But there was an unresolved in that emotion that just kept coming up. And so I was
It
attracting what
will
needed to be
keep
healed.
coming. Yeah, your subconscious, as we know, it will keep attracting things until it's healed.
So I want to do this next slide real quick. And it kind of goes into different types of uh, parent wounds and how they actually like show up, if you will.
Yeah.
And then you could speak on that. So inner child wounds, and there's different ones. There's abandonment wounds, guilt wounds, trust wounds, and neglect wounds. And fear of being left out, fear of being left, hates being alone, codependent,
Mhm.
threatens to leave, normally attracts emotionally unavailable people, which is what you talked about. And that's the abandonment wound. Sometimes those parent wounds turn into guilt wounds. The guilt wound being feels sorry or bad, doesn't like to ask for things, uses guilt to manipulate, is afraid to set boundaries, normally attracts people who make them feel guilty,
Mm.
right? Then we have the trust wound, which is afraid to be hurt. This is me. I'm the trust wound kid. Doesn't trust themselves, finds a way to not trust people, feels insecure and needs lots of external validation, doesn't feel safe, and normally attracts people who don't feel safe. And then, of course, we've got the last one, which is neglect wound, struggles to let things go, has low self-esteem, gets angry easily, struggles to say no, represses emotions, fears being vulnerable, normally attracts people who don't appreciate them or makes them feel seen. What's interesting is wounded children find each other,
They
right?
do.
Your inner child that's wounded is seeking healing. It's not what we realize, but is what we're seeking. And we will find partnerships that will bring up things. And usually if you really were to dissect and break those people down, like I said there, I have trust wounds. But I was always finding myself with I forgot what the last one was. The neglect wound. The trust wound kid, was always finding the neglect wound partner until I got my healing.
Mm-hmm.
Because and it was so crazy, like the person that would struggle to let things go, me needing the constant reassurance and me always pairing up with someone who had not my specific wound, but some other type of wound, and we would just go at it. Matter of fact, my partner and I now, when we first got into our relationship, it was tumultuous, and we had a lot of trauma and a lot of work, and it took us to do couples therapy, but both of us had a willingness and realizing that we both had wounds and we were showing up in each other's lives to fix those wounds, but instead we battled it out. And until we really understood that you're looking for your healing and you're fighting me on that, and I'm looking for mine and vice versa, instead of saying, well, what, and having the conversation, say, well, what is it that you need healing in and how can I help?
Yeah.
But ultimately understanding that the work was required for self first.
Yeah. And one thing I do want to say is, like you had said, it's two toxic people attract each other.
Right.
So a lot of times I notice many people, just like myself, it's you may have one wound, like the father wound like is predominant, and then you realize you have a mother wound as well, because I truly believe a healthy person will not attract a toxic person. So that just, I know, adds in a lot more. Who's listening?
No, but that is so true. And that is so imperative that you just said that. Because I think a lot of times when people are watching, even for myself, when I was looking and seeking, I was always looking in a way, it was a subconscious thought, but I was victimizing myself constantly because I was always like, see, that's what they did to me. But not realizing that, Lorraine, you are attracting people in your life that are treating you a certain way because there's an invitation, because somewhere, something about you says you deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
And so toxic is attracted to toxic. When I became more of a whole person, and it's a work in process. When you go through things in life, you're not made whole. You have to continuously work on things. And like you said, when we're multifaceted, which means there's layers to this shit, right?
Absolutely.
I unpeeled one layer and I was like, oh, there's something else. There's something else. There's something else. And just knowing that, okay, it's a rinse and repeat. Once I learn the tools and the modalities and things like that, I can rinse and repeat and get my healing layer by layer. And also being okay to say, okay, this is who I was. These are the things that I went through. I can bury her, but she has a ghost. Sometimes she pops up. And really being aware of self and how those emotions are popping up, especially when my fears, rear their ugly head.
Inner critic.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the healing. How to get to the healing. We kind of started talking about that. For people out there, where to start. For you, it was, you were already being proactive by going to counseling and therapy, and finally taking an initiative to actually go into rehab. What was it for you that finally took the advice? I mean, you kind of said it, but like, what is it? Like, how important was it that you took that step?
Yeah, the pain was so severe. And I knew I needed to do something about it. And that's the first step of, I would say, healing your parent wounds. It's having the awareness that you're sick of your own shit.
Mm-hmm.
This keeps happening over and over again. You're sick of being disconnected from yourself. You're sick of not feeling authentic. Maybe you're people pleasing, you're molding yourself around certain people. And we know that when you are not being authentic to yourself, you feel it. You feel it in your gut, you feel it in your chest, you feel it in your soul. So it's being sick of knowing that there's more greatness within you, that you're living through this void. So when are you going to be done with living through this void? And that was me. It was, I'm done living through this void. I'm done trying to look outside for people to fill me up. Because when people do meet that need, it lasts for what, 5 to 10 minutes?
Right.
Then I'm right back to feeling unworthy and unloved. So first things first is having the awareness. Yeah, and just coming to terms with it.
And you said something earlier that was really interesting to me, because I think a lot of people can relate to that. It's like, there was a time in your life when you didn't want to get the help because it required you to let things go. Like, okay, if I go to this place, I already know what they're going to tell me. They're going to tell me I need to leave him.
Mm-hmm.
And you weren't ready to do that. And I think that a lot of people out there won't say that out loud, but a lot of reasons why we stay in a thing is because it's so familiar. And even though it's toxic and it's crazy and it's causing us great pain, it's all we know.
Absolutely.
And it's a matter of being able to say, you know what, I have to start believing that there's something better for me. And the thing is, even for me, when I was going through my process myself, and even when I teach people now and I coach people, it's like, okay, you get it, but now what? And being honest about the process and saying, there will be times when you have to shed people. There will be times when people have to go. There will be times when you will feel alone in the process, because everything that kept you in that mindset, all of that stuff has to go. And sometimes you have to get on your boat, row to that island and burn the boats. And
Yeah.
know that that process will include those feelings that you're not comfortable with. So talk to the people listening about that and how you were able to get past that point.
Death of the old self is what I like to
I
say.
love that.
Because you do have to leave that part of you that was your survival self. And also having compassion for that part, him or
Mm,
her, because that was what you needed to do to survive, even if it was put yourself in situations that were very toxic. I used to correlate chaos with love. And
interesting.
that
Me too.
literally that was my thing. If we're not fighting, you don't love me. And now in my relationships, it's like there's no reason to yell. Like I'm just very into my own energy. There's no reason to have that
Right.
elevation. But that elevation was what I fed off of and what I loved. So to answer your question, yeah, it comes back to just being ready to let go of that past self and being willing to reap the rewards of being able to step into your truth.
And it is so peaceful, but it is scary peaceful, right? It's so funny because recently, um, I've been in a really good space emotionally as a person because I've made some decisions that were indecisions for too long.
Mm.
And I always say the greatest sin you'll ever do for your life is the sin of indecision. When you just make the choice for your life and you say, I'm going to make this choice, you have to push through that choice. And I made a lot of definitive decisions for my life where I wasn't like, I'm not looking back. Now that I've made those decisions, having the awareness that it's uncomfortable, because that means my habits have to change.
Mm-hmm.
My routines have to change, and understanding the power in that and doing that one little thing each time. But it's funny because even in my relationship, there's been this peace for both of us because of the work that we've done. The thing is that every now and again, the old me wants to creep her head in and pick a fight or get a paranoid or get afraid of saying, why is everything feel so peaceful right now? Why is everything good? And just waiting for the ball to drop because that's so ingrained in my psyche and my neurons, and having to really check in and say, take a step back, breathe, calm, pray, whatever I need to do, but know that this is okay and I'm deserving of this life that is peaceful.
So
And it is
powerful.
so hard when you haven't had that your entire life to feel in as one with it. And so that is where I am, true candor with my own life. What about
Proud
for
of
you?
you.
Do you feel that? Do you go through that?
I do. And especially as you know, being coaches, it's
Yeah.
even more like everything, the tools that I know, the tools that I teach, it's like implementing it in my day-to-day life all the time. So I can see myself sometimes slipping, but it's a matter of coming back and asking myself, which road do I want to take? I know the one that's corruptive and destructive.
Mm-hmm.
So I know where that ends or that leads. But choosing where I've been going and all of the amazing things that have come into fruition in my life, it's choosing that. And I always tell clients, even it's, some days are going to be better than others, but it's
Absolutely.
up to you to choose yourself. And when you choose yourself, you're coming from a place of wholeness. And then everything else is like a magnet towards you.
Absolutely.
So, like, back to what you said about mindset, it's like, are we going to do this or are we not?
Mm-hmm.
There's no in between.
That's so true. So how did you get to the coaching? How did you get from this is my work, this is my breakdown, this is my breakthrough, and now I want to give that back in some way. I want to serve people in a way where I can be the teacher now, the coach. How did you get to that point?
Yeah, I was in deep self-discovery after rehab and continuing to do my healing work for over a year. And I was just in deep discovery mode and praying because my higher power is God. And I was praying and praying and praying. And after 2 months of praying, I got this voice that spoke to me and said, fatherless daughters.
Mm.
And from there, I went to fatherless daughters, father wound. Then I went to mother wound. Then I realized I had my own mother wound and all of that. But basically, it was my story that got me here. I never, ever Like, I was a hot mess. I was a hot mess.
Me too,
Definition of a
girl.
hot mess. You would never think I would be where I am right
Well, I'm
now.
older than you, so I was I'm the matriarch. You were,
Yeah.
but I get it. Trust me, I get it.
You would never
Yeah.
think. I never thought I'd be able to like help as many people as I've helped. And it's just realizing that I've been through, and I'm sure you can relate. It's like I've been through so much. I've been to the depths, the core, the darkness.
Right.
And if I can do it, anyone can do it. Because it wasn't just those that week in rehab, because it was a high intensive rehab. It was the tools that I used to continue implementing, to continue the readings of trauma work, continuation of courses and whatnot that got me to where I was. It was the desire, the willingness, the wanting
Right.
to change my life.
It became a must for you.
Yeah. So, and then I ended up realizing that there must be so many people out there with these parent wounds that they're unaware of.
Right.
And now I'm here and I host her. I do everything now.
Listen, and you're so spontaneous. You're like, I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to drive to Vegas and I'm going to put my word out there and I'm going to find other platforms and stuff because it's your story, your journey, your passion, your desire to help people really resonates for me from the moment I talked to you from the first time.
Thank you.
So I want to put one last slide up and then we'll conclude this beautiful episode. But let's talk. We got wounded inner child and the healed inner child. And here's how, these are just some talking points for people out there who do feel their wounded child and who you could get. Sometimes we just don't know. We don't have the tools. But the wounded inner child plays the victim role.
Mm-hmm.
The healed inner child takes ownership without the O at the end. That was my fault for the typo. The wounded child is insecure with self. To be a healed inner child feels confident and secure. The wounded child needs external validation. The healed inner child validates themselves. These are things that we could start working on for those of us who feel wounded. The wounded child is afraid to be alone. Learning to be and enjoy aloneness. I really have learned
now.
to really, not to be lonely, but to have time spent alone. It's just to kind of check in with self. And I think for a lot of people, being alone can be a very uncomfortable space because you get to hear yourself and the noise.
Sit with yourself. Yeah.
But I am like, you know what? I need to hear sometimes. I need to quiet the noise and I need to hear what's coming up so I can speak to it and give it grace and let it know it's going to be okay. The other ones are easily triggered, calm, and understanding. I was a triggered person. I still am. I'm still working on that one, right? Kwan's like, yeah, whatever, Kwan. Always very serious. That could be me sometimes too. Creates joy and happiness. Looks for the negative, finds the positive. Filled with stress and worry, filled with light and love. There's always going to be things that are negatively affecting our lives, but there's also a lot of things in our lives that we can be incredibly grateful for. And I feel like gratitude is an amazing antidote to feeling bad and down and feeling dark. It's just looking and searching for those things that you can be grateful for. Some of them are small and some of them are big, but we truly all have something to be grateful for. So how do you want to conclude and what do you want to share?
I love inner child.
With the people out there who are dealing with their wounded parents and their wounded inner child? And then how do they get in touch with you if they were looking for coaching in this specific thing?
Absolutely. So one thing I just want to piggyback off from that PowerPoint is just to be mindful that a lot of us are adults living out of our inner child about like 99.9% of the time, unless we're aware of this type of work. And when we haven't addressed these mother or father wounds, that's what we're predominantly living through. When we get triggered, when we're in a relationship, what we're looking through the lens of the wounded inner child. So that is the biggest thing I would say for those who want to start healing as well, is start really getting in tune and asking yourself, am I coming from my adult conscious self or am I coming from this wounded inner child that wants love and is screaming for me to give her that love, not so much the external world?
Absolutely.
So that's one of the biggest things. And also asking yourself, do I want to stay in this victim mentality? And it's not to say not to shame or anything, but a lot of times, like myself included, I was stuck in that. My dad chose drugs over me. My dad chose drugs over me. And that was me staying in my victim mentality. And being in that victim mentality does not help you grow.
It does not.
It keeps you stagnant and stuck. So it's asking yourself, do you want to keep consuming that poison and hoping that other person feels it or gets hurt? Or do you want to drop the poison and start putting yourself as the priority that you are?
Have you forgiven your father
I have.
and your mother?
My mother, yes.
And how
And I
healing
know
has
it
that
comes a
been?
lot, and it comes with time because I don't put that on my client. Like I don't force that on my clients at all or anything. I say when you're ready to
When you're
forgive, you
ready.
can.
Yep.
But another way you can look at it is accepting what was.
Absolutely.
And it feels freeing back to like my father and forgiving him because you know what? Not having a father growing up really messed me up. It really did. And not having a mother that gave me the nurturing, the love and affection, it did also mess me up.
Yeah.
But it's coming from a place of compassion and understanding that I am responsible for my work and that regardless of what happened to me, doesn't have to define me.
Absolutely.
So to answer your question, how those who can find me.
Yeah. How can they find you if they need your coaching?
You can find me on Instagram right now. Right now, my website is under construction. So Instagram is my go-to, LinkedIn as well. I do group coaching. I do one-on-one. I'm actually launching my next round of group coaching for February. I also host women's retreats in Sedona, Arizona.
Ooh, I will be at the next one.
You
Let me
should.
know. I totally will come.
You should. My last one I had in September, and it was such a hit.
Awesome.
So,
I will definitely be a part of that.
it's
I have not been to Sedona and I definitely want to go. So let me
oh
know.
my
I
God,
will
you
definitely
can be
come
a
out there.
facilitator. Yeah,
Hey, I'll do that
let's
too.
it.
Sign me up. Well, Janelle, I just want to tell you what beautiful work that you're doing. I think a lot of people out there really can benefit so much from understanding how powerful this is and getting healing in this. So I wish you all the luck in your continued success.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Keep spreading your love and your light. I love your transparency. I think that's so important when we're coaching people is to really just be our authentic selves and tell our truths. And, the saying goes, and I've been saying this so much lately, but the teacher shows up when the student's ready to learn. And I feel like people who tap into these programs because they're ready.
You have
and
to
they
be ready.
just need the resources. They just need to know that there's people out there that can give them the tools they need to get their healing. So thank you guys again for watching another episode of The Mindsetters. Again, do not forget to hit the subscription button. And until next time, ciao.